Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast Livestream. We try to do this every single Wednesday. Excuse me as I just pull up some things here that I need, including the chat, so I can see what everyone is saying. There we go. But welcome to the live stream. We will go for a full hour today between 4 and 5 p.m. Eastern time, and it will be good. And please send along your questions for our Q and A session. 1 second. I want to get to the chat with you guys. And there we go. Okay. Now I can see. It's going to be good. We're going for a full hour again. Send your questions for the Q and A session. I already see that we have a very active chat going on right now. So that is definitely good. And we've got a lot to talk about, as always. You know, the Middle East never sleeps. And here on the Watchman Newscast, we like to break down why events happening in the world's most volatile region right now affect you profoundly, no matter where you live. And by the way, we talk Middle East, obviously Israel, the majority of the time, but we also talk Russia, China, Latin America. We were talking this week, Iranian warships in Brazil. Many times we tie it back to the Middle East, the world's most pivotal and strategic region, but we're hitting the whole global scene, including right here in the United States. Quick teaser for you on that note. Right now, I am currently working on an upcoming special for TBN called What is the Great Reset? Do you know what the Great Reset is? I would imagine that this audience, or our viewership, our Watchmen subscribers, would have heard that term for certain, especially since 2020. What is the Great Reset? Working on that right now. It's going to be very good. I believe it will air either later this month or in April. As soon as we have an air date, I will get it to you. So do you know what the Great Reset is? Hint, hint, it ain't good. It ain't so great, believe me, if you love freedom. So would like to hear your thoughts on that real quick. And if you're looking forward to that special that I'm going to begin work on. But let's get into it today. We've got a lot to discuss. Welcome to everyone from around the world. I'm just looking at our chat right now. Zimbabwe. Hey, welcome, Zimbabwe. We will have people from all over the world joining us. Thousands before we are done, which is fun. A few things we want to get into today. Number one, Russia reportedly paying Palestinians to go and fight in Ukraine alongside Russia. Wow. That's a big story, right? Again, the mainstream media virtually ignoring it, but I think it's a pretty big one. So we'll talk about that. And along those lines, we'll talk about Israel and Russia. And we've talked about this a bunch in recent months, folks, but it continues to go in this direction, a collision course between Russia and Israel, where we have Russia aligning itself with Israel's greatest enemies. Case in point, now recruiting Palestinians to fight in Ukraine. Then you have Iran, Syria. We'll break that down too. Obviously, prophetic implications there. Also, we've had a lot of unrest in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria as well, the biblical heartland in recent weeks, with a Palestinian terror wave. We want to talk about that as well. A tense time in Israel. Hey, I just returned, and I didn't feel tense at all. I actually had a great production trip to Israel, just got back about a week ago. We shared that on last week's live stream. But hey, you know, I know there's a lot of political turmoil in Israel right now with protests. We have the terror wave, but Israel is Israel, and Israelis are a vigilant people. They are resilient, and they keep plugging along day to day, working, raising their families, and loving life in the land of Israel, in God's land. So, yes, there is a lot of chaos right now, but Israel will prevail through the madness. But nevertheless, we will talk about it. We will break it down for you. Hey, before I get into it, I assume if you're here on the live stream, you are probably a subscriber. If not, please subscribe. Click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. Give us a thumbs up as well. We would love to have you here with us as watchmen and women on the wall for such a time as this. Also, Instagram, which I mentioned last week, Erick.Stakelbeck. Make sure to follow us there. We're doing a lot of behind-the-scenes content there now, folks. During the Israel production last week, I was posting some pretty cool shots of us on location and in the production. So Instagram for sure, Erick.Stakelbeck. We're also on Twitter and Facebook. What do you make of this report? Russia paying Palestinians to come to Ukraine and fight against Ukrainians. Here we go. The Jerusalem Post I'm going to quote directly. I'm just looking down at my phone. Pardon me. Let's see. A Lebanese government security source has told the Media Line, that's a media outlet called the Media Line, that Palestinians residing in Lebanon have signed up to join the ongoing conflict in Ukraine on behalf of Russia. And they've been offered a sum of $350 apiece by Russian entities, according to this story. The source added that the recruitment effort is being carried out by activists affiliated with the Palestinian embassy in Lebanon. Most of those enlisting to fight in Russia with Russia were born after 1969, as those born after this point onwards do not have proper registration with the Lebanese authorities, making it easier to travel for the purpose of participating in the conflict as mercenaries. And it says the Lebanese government lacks the ability to monitor or track the movements of these Palestinian recruits for Russia. I want to break that down a little bit more in a second, who exactly these Palestinian recruits are. But folks, what a turn this has taken. You may remember several months ago, I mean, the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine was February 24th. Several months ago here in the newscast, we talked about Russia recruiting Syrian mercenaries, veterans of that Syrian civil war closely aligned with the regime of Bashar al-Assad, recruiting them to come and fight in Russia, and perhaps even people from Afghanistan and other Muslim nations coming to fight in Russia. There were persistent reports about that. And of course, we have the Iran-Russia relationship, which we'll break down a bit more here today on the newscast, and Iran's assistance to Russia in the form of suicide drones and also in the form of Iranian trainers on the ground in Russia, training Russian troops on how to use those drones. And now we have recruitment of Palestinians from the Russian side. I've got a lot to say about this. And again, this was reported in the Media Line. The Jerusalem Post and other Middle East media outlets are picking this up. But this piece goes on to say the majority of the Palestinians being deployed to the front lines in Ukraine hail from Ain al-Khilweh, the largest Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, just south of the port city of Sidon. Now, you might say, what, these are Palestinian mercenaries? Is this Hamas, Islamic Jihad? Actually, according to this piece, the recruits are reportedly members of the Fatah political movement, which is led by Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. Surprise, surprise. Israel's so-called partner for peace, Mahmoud Abbas, and also linked to other organizations like the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. These individuals reportedly receive a monthly stipend and compensation for their families in exchange for agreeing to participate in the conflict in Ukraine on behalf of Russian forces. Again, folks, I'm looking down because I'm reading directly from my phone. I'm just reading this piece for you from the Jerusalem Post. And the recruitment of the Palestinians and others is, drum roll please, is being carried out in coordination with Hezbollah. Are you surprised? According to the source, Hezbollah is also actively enlisting young supporters, including those skilled in operating drones and individuals with expertise in guerrilla warfare in urban areas to assist the Russians in the war in Ukraine. It's not clear exactly how many Palestinians have been recruited to fight for Russia, but it is thought that approximately 300 individuals have already completed rapid training in Russia. Wow. Folks, a lot to unpack here, right? Number one, Russia recruiting Palestinians. Number two, Hezbollah, the Iran-backed proxy Hezbollah, with a hand in it. Number one, the Palestinians living in the refugee camps in Lebanon are not living under good conditions there. So it's no surprise that Russia would reach out to desperate individuals, just like they did in Syria. Syria is obviously, much of Syria is rubble in the wake of the civil war. So Russia reaching out to Syrians as well, no surprise. And $300 or $350 to one of these folks is like thousands and thousands of dollars to you and I. and Russia's taking advantage of that. That is not a surprise, but it is interesting that Russia's gaze, as it looks for mercenaries to join in its cause, its gaze continues to move southward into the Middle East. And you see Hezbollah now actively involved in the recruitment of these Palestinians. And by the way, how much does Mahmoud Abbas know? Not large numbers, according to this piece. And again, I was quoting directly from a Jerusalem Post piece, and the Jerusalem Post picked up an article from Media Line, which are not fringe publications, especially certainly not the Jerusalem Post. But these are not fringe publications that would publish wild and outlandish conspiracy theories. There seems to be some validity here, folks. Considering the track record of Russia, again, recruiting Syrians, working closely with Iran and Hezbollah over the years in Syria. So this is not a huge shock when you break it all down. But Hezbollah's involvement, look, Hezbollah marches to the drumbeat of Tehran. What the Iranian regime says goes. Hezbollah was created by the Iranian regime, funded, supported, armed by. It is a wholly owned subsidiary, an arm of the Iranian regime operating in southern Lebanon and points beyond, by the way. So if Iran and Russia have a growing alliance, and we've documented this on a regular basis here in the newscast, if Iran and Russia have a growing military alliance, wouldn't it make sense that an arm of Iran, an arm of the regime, I should say, not the Iranian people, an arm of the Iranian regime, Hezbollah, wouldn't it make sense that they would also have a strong relationship and a growing relationship with Russia? Especially, folks, when you look at the past decade plus, look, Iran and Hezbollah were shoulder to shoulder fighting alongside Russian troops in Syria, sharing weaponry, intelligence, all sorts of things. So it's no surprise that Hezbollah is saying, hey, okay, we'll help you, Russia. And the other piece to this, in terms of Iran and Hezbollah helping Vladimir Putin's war machine, they're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. They are saying, what do we get out of it? What can we get in return from Russia? I've called it here the quid pro quo between Iran and Russia. Yes, Iran is supplying Russia with, at the end of the day, it will be thousands of attack drones that it's using in Ukraine, to the point where Iran is now looking to build a drone factory inside Russia to the east of Moscow. That's going to happen. And Iran will mass produce drones, and Russia will take them off the assembly lines and it will use them. So this is a very useful tool in Russia's war machine, its war effort in Ukraine. Iran must get something in return. And we've detailed this in the newscast. We've asked the question, what are they getting in return? Ballistic missile technology. We know that Russia is set to deliver some fighter jets to Iran, Russian fighter jets, the Sukhoi fighter jet. Look, Iran's Air Force is outdated from the 1960s and 70s, some old U.S. fighter jets even in their arsenal from the days before 1979, before this regime came to power, when, believe it or not, Iran and the U.S. were allies, and Iran and Israel were allies under the Shah. I know it's hard to fathom now that Iran is not the Iranian people, again, the regime. Crucial distinction there. The Iranian regime is Israel's greatest adversary. So it's hard to believe that it was not always that way in the 60s and the 70s, but that's the situation we have today. So Russia, certainly ballistic missile technology, the fighter jets, perhaps even helping Iran with its nuclear program. But I believe that Iran has been making the case for months now, if not years, to Russia, that Russia needs to close the skies above Syria to Israeli fighter jets. That's what Iran really wants out of this. They want Russia, which has thousands of troops in Syria right now at Israel's doorstep. Iran wants Russia to say to Israel, no more. Wants Russia to control the skies over Syria and, again, prevent Israel from having freedom of movement to bomb Iran and Hezbollah inside Syria and push them back. Russia has not done that. Russia and Israel have a so-called deconfliction mechanism where before Israel makes a move against Iran in Syria. Perhaps it gives Russia a heads up and says, hey, we're coming in. Make sure none of your Russian military assets or troops are in the line of fire. And they've kept this going since September 2015 for over 7 years now. Could a day be coming where that deconfliction mechanism, so-called, comes to an end as Russia and Iran grow closer together to the point where Russia, I don't want to say it's reliant on Iran, but Russia is counting on those drones to help its war effort. No doubt. Those Iranian drones have become a crucial component of Russia's war effort. The military alliance is one piece, economic, trade, across all areas, Russia and Iran are drawing closer together. How long will Russia stand by and allow its close ally to be slammed inside Syria? Because, folks, those Israeli airstrikes have been highly effective and really hurt Iran, its military infrastructure, its terror infrastructure, its efforts to ship precision-guided missiles, PGM parts, through Syria into the hands of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Israel has had great success, and yet Iran continues to push. Syria is an absolutely essential linchpin to Iran's strategy to surround Israel and destroy it. We know that's never going to happen. We've read the book. We know how it ends. It does not end very well for the Iranian regime or the enemies of Israel. Nonetheless, they continue to push, and they're not getting the memo, so to speak. The more Israel strikes, the more Iran seems to try and dig in its heels in Syria and say, hey, we're here to stay. Israel says, no way. And what you have there is a collision course. But is a collision course coming between Israel and Russia as well? Because the more Iran is hit and the closer Iran and Russia become, and again, Russia's right there. This is happening under Russia's noses in Syria, where Israel's striking Iran. Iran's going to say, hey, are we friends or not? I thought we had this alliance, Moscow. Yet you're allowing Israel to strike us again and again right under your noses here in Syria? Come on. Quid pro quo. We're helping you in Ukraine. Now it's time that you helped us in Syria. Help push Israel out of Syria. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, by the way. Israel will find, I think it will eventually happen that Russia is going to try to lay down the gauntlet to Israel, but I don't think Israel's going to stop. There's no way Israel can do that. They call this the war between wars, where Israel is actively looking to push Iran back. It must. It's an existential threat for Iran to be perched on Israel's northeastern border in Syria, for Iran to duplicate what it's been able to establish in southern Lebanon in the form of Hezbollah. Hey, 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel. And again, Iran wants to duplicate that in Syria, right next door. Israel says, fool me once. Lebanon, it happened. We're not allowing this again in Syria. We're getting ahead of this, and we are not allowing you to do this. So, collision course, for sure. But Russia eventually, I believe, is going to say enough, and Israel is going to say, no. Because if we stop striking Iran in Syria, Iran will have Lebanon Part 2 at our doorstep, and Iran will be able to successfully transit precision-guided missile parts, PGMs, to Hezbollah, and that's an existential threat. It's a red line, and we can't have it. By the way, precision-guided missiles, you've heard me talk about them a lot here in the newscast. They do exactly what their name says. They are designed to hit a target with greater accuracy and greater precision. Hezbollah, Iran would love to have these and threaten Israel, for instance, Israel's Dimona nuclear reactor in the Negev desert. And there's all sorts of nasty repercussions for that. So red lines everywhere. And if Russia's going to try to draw a red line of its own against Israel in Syria, Israel's going to have to cross that red line and leave the consequences to God Almighty. And that's what I think we are moving towards, because I don't see Russia and Iran backing off from each other. And over the months and years, including in Israel, and lawmakers in the U.S. I've interviewed for the Watchman, I've persistently brought up this Russia-Iran relationship. And folks, I have to tell you, many times, most of the time, the people I've interviewed who are smart people who get it, it was a blind spot. they would kind of twist a little bit and say, well, yeah, Russia is helping Iran and Syria, but there's no love lost there. And it's not a long-term thing. And it's just a marriage of convenience. And we don't have to worry about that. At the end of the day, Russia will step up and be a responsible actor in Syria. And it will distance itself from Iran when the rubber hits the road. And by the way, we have that deconfliction mechanism. It's worked like a charm. We don't have to worry about Russia. That was then. I didn't agree with them then, clearly. And I know what the book of Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 says, ultimately, that there will be a great betrayal where Russia will lead a coalition of nations against Israel in what Ezekiel calls the latter days. All that said, just from a purely geopolitical standpoint, it didn't make sense to me because Russia was openly aligned with Iran and Syria and Hezbollah. Listen, Russia was openly and is increasingly openly aligned with Israel's greatest enemies. And I said, guys, and these were some Israeli officials and defense officials and guys in the counterterrorism field and national security experts who know their stuff and who really get it and are truly smart people. But I don't want to say it was denial about Russia, but who wants to really admit that you have a massive nuclear powerhouse at your doorstep, which is hostile to you and is aligning with your greatest enemies? Enemies like Iran and the Assad regime and Hezbollah, and even a Hamas delegation, by the way, has visited Moscow. Enemies devoted to your destruction. So it's not exactly easy to admit that and say, wow, this ain't good. Now Russia is aligned with them, a nuclear power aligned with terrorists. The Iranian regime, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, Hezbollah, these are terrorists. Has there been another time in the nuclear age where a nuclear power has been openly aligned with terrorists? I'm jogging my brain here. The closest I can get would be Pakistan. The Pakistani ISI, their intelligence services working actively with the Taliban. That's the closest I believe I can get. If I'm drawing a blank here, commenters, viewers, we'll discuss in the Q and A as well. Leave your comments here. I'd love to get your take. But folks, am I missing something? A nuclear power, Pakistan is a nuclear power, aligned with terrorist entities in the form of the Taliban. That's going back to the mid-90s. Other than that, this Russia, Hezbollah, Iranian Revolutionary Guards relationship seems to be the only example I can find. And I point that out because, man, that's disturbing. That is not a good thing. But that is the situation we have right now. And now Russia, again, you can tell a lot about a man and about a nation by the company they keep. This is who Vladimir Putin aligns himself with. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Iranian regime, Assad in Syria, Venezuela, China, North Korea. And we've had some trolls and Putin backers comment during the live streams. And usually it is, but what about Ukraine? But what about Zelensky? We're talking about Putin right now. It's always deflect, deflect, deflect. When they tell me, hey, Putin is defending Western civilization and he's a defender of Christianity, I said, oh, really? Then why is he openly aligned with the greatest enemies of Christianity? North Korea, China, and Iran, the world's most notorious persecutors of followers of Jesus, of Christians. These are the people that Vladimir Putin has aligned himself with. But I thought he was a defender of Christianity in some people's minds. So let's focus on him and on Russia. Stop deflecting and changing the subject. What about the U.S.? We're talking about Russia and Putin right now. I have nothing against the Russian people. I love the Russian people. I think they're being misled by Vladimir Putin. But the deflection that I get in the comments, no one answers that question. I pose the question, if he's such a great guy and such a friend of Western civilization and a defender of Christianity, why is he aligned with the most wicked regimes in the world? Arguably the three most wicked regimes in the world, China, North Korea, and Iran. There's never an answer. It's always, what about, what about, what about? Okay. Just wanted to point that out. You can tell a lot about a man and a nation by the company they keep, which brings us full circle to the Palestinian conversation. And now, is this a sign, do you think, of desperation on the part of Putin? Now he's going into Palestinian refugee camps to recruit them as mercenaries? What do you think? He's clearly gearing up for something big in 2023 for sure. That's coming. And the other piece to this, look, and people in the West, I think people are naive. I don't think people are naive. I think the leaders in Europe and the U.S. are completely naive when it comes to Putin's intentions. They keep saying, well, when we help Ukraine defeat Russia. Folks, let me tell you, let me ask you, do you really think Vladimir Putin is going to allow that to happen? The alternative for him to victory in Ukraine may be a bullet in his head, maybe death, assassination, in the very least a coup. He's out of power. And it might not be a pleasant end for him. He might not just be sent into exile. It might be worse. Don't you think he'll do everything in his power to avoid that fate? Here's what I'm getting at. Before he goes down in defeat in Ukraine, he's going to throw everything but the kitchen sink at Ukraine. I mean, don't kid yourself. This is going to get worse before it gets better. And I hate to say that. I know people sigh. Oh, gosh, they sigh when they hear that. You come here for reality to the Watchman. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say, well, when Ukraine is victorious, and it's going to be a long haul. And he is not going down. He's going down. If he goes down, he's going down swinging in a nasty, brutal way towards Ukraine. So I think the West needs to wake up. This is the kind of guy who's not going to just take an L and go away. He's not just going to take an L in Ukraine. After all he's invested in Ukraine, blood and treasure, legacy, reputation, everything. He's not going to just accept a loss there, especially a loss that's been assisted by the West, which is sending arms and money and trainers into Ukraine. That's a double insult to Putin's pride. He's not going to take it laying down. I'm just being realistic. Does anyone disagree? I mean, does anyone really think? Someone says here, Randall Mitchell, one of our commenters, Putin probably feels he has no choice at this point. He invaded. Hey, there's no turning back now. It already has been bad. Reportedly, some 100,000 Russian troops killed. The assault on Kyiv last year was turned back. He had to withdraw. There's already been black eyes and embarrassments. It has not gone well. It has not gone according to plan. Even his staunchest defenders have to admit that. But for him to accept, defeat, and to pull Russian troops out of Ukraine and to accept a ceasefire that leaves Russia in a weakened position, I don't think he can accept that. If he wants to continue to, number one, stay in power, and number two, quite possibly live. I don't know that Putin can accept that. And I'm just being realistic here. When I hear all the chatter out of Western leaders, well, we're going to defeat him. I don't know that it's going to be that easy. And the nuclear factor, and some people like to say, oh, it's alarmism, sensationalism. Look, Putin is an evil man. And he's talked a bunch, he and his inner circle, about using nuclear weapons. They've blustered, they've alluded to it, they've threatened. When we say throwing everything and the kitchen sink at Ukraine, is it beyond the realm of possibility that Russia would use tactical battlefield nuclear weapons in Ukraine? God forbid. I pray that never happens. But folks, I know what we're discussing right now is very unpleasant. No one wants to see any of this happen. It would be a lot easier for me to say to you, hey, Ukraine's going to prevail. Putin's going to be defeated. Russia, he's going to be pushed back. Putin will be deposed. He'll be out of power. Things will get back to normal. Normal is not coming back. not only in Russia, Ukraine, but in the world, in case you haven't noticed. We're in Bible times, prophetic times. It would be easier for me to put a happy face on and say, it's going to work out. Ukraine's going to win a resounding victory in this war and push Russia back over the border, never to be heard from again, and it's over. That's not reality. It sounds great, and I know that's what everyone wants to see. Not everyone, but many want to see. I don't see it playing out that way. And I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. You might say, gosh, Stakelbeck, man, how depressing are you? And I'm not trying to be, but I'm trying to fulfill the call as a watchman for you and live up to the name of this show and just be honest with you and lay it out. So where does that leave us? You might say, you're painting a dire, hopeless picture. No, there's always hope. And ultimately, hope comes in the form of the Lord Jesus. And you got to pray. Pray about the situation. I'm sure our watchmen and women on the wall have been praying about this for a year plus, the situation there in Ukraine. Pray. God is sovereign over the situation, and pray for, gosh, a bloodless, too late for that, but pray for an end to this somehow. Pray that it doesn't escalate. That has to be our prayer. Which I think would be a miracle if it doesn't escalate further. I just don't see Putin backing off here and walking away and accepting a defeat, accepting a big L. If he does that, he may not be long for this world, and he knows it. So I think it's wishful thinking on the part of Western leaders who continue to pour arms and money into this conflict. He can be, certainly Russia has been weakened through this, no doubt. He might limp at the end. They might be limping, but again, he's going to go all out to win this thing. And we need to be realistic about that and know the stakes for him and know what we are facing here. The more you're getting involved, if you're Western leaders, the more you're getting involved, the deeper you get in, he's getting in deeper too. And it's strengthening his resolve in Moscow. So interesting times. Keep that situation in your prayers, folks, but just a dose of reality. And where does this go with the Palestinian issue? Talk about this thing expanding. And what does Israel have to say about that? Israel's already not happy at all about the Russia-Iran alliance. And folks, it is pretty much now a formalized alliance, no doubt. Now Palestinians being recruited as well to the Russian cause. What does Israel think about this? I interviewed Eli Cohen, Israel's foreign minister, last week when I was in Jerusalem. He had just returned from Ukraine, from Kyiv, where he met with Zelensky, and he pledged that Israel and Ukraine are joining forces against Iran, not against Russia, but against Iran. He's finding common ground with Ukraine, the common enemy of Iran, which I thought was interesting on a lot of levels. But ultimately, with Eli Cohen, the foreign minister, Israel's top diplomat, visiting Ukraine and becoming the highest ranking Middle Eastern official to visit that country since the war broke out a year ago, I think Israel is sending a message to Russia. A lot of people are saying in the comments, Israel, don't get involved, stay out of it. I get it. And Israel has walked that fine line for a year, trying not to anger Russia because of Syria, which we discussed a few minutes ago, but trying to offer support to Ukraine short of military aid, more humanitarian aid. So Israel has walked that fine line. I think Israel now is playing a bit of a geopolitical, game is not the right word, but they're playing the game in a sense. Think about this, folks. Russia is aligned with Israel's greatest enemy, Iran, and is going to arm Iran, not to mention Hezbollah, Assad, and the rest. So Israel is saying, and at the same time, Russia has relations with Israel and would consider it maybe not a warm relationship or an alliance, but a civil relationship with Israel. Certainly some 1 million Russians as well immigrated to Israel after the fall of the Soviet Union. So a large Russian-speaking population in Israel. But Israel's saying, you know what, wait a minute. We've been playing this role where we're walking this delicate fine line. We don't want to make Russia mad over Syria, and there's wisdom to that, for sure. Why create a major conflict at your border with a nuclear power, which could hamper your ability to strike Iran? I get it, 100%. And most people with common sense get Israel's rationale here in its stance towards the Russia-Ukraine war. But Israel at this point, I believe, is saying, you know what, wait a minute. We've walked that fine line. We have not given Ukraine military aid, despite Zelensky repeatedly calling for it. They want Iron Dome, missile defense. Despite pressure from the U.S. and Europe, Israel has not budged. Israel has said, we're not doing that. We'll send aid, but not military aid, just humanitarian and the like. Defensive aid, essentially. So Israel has done that. And Israel has kept that deconfliction mechanism with Russia in Syria. And Eli Cohen, one of his first calls, if not his first call upon becoming foreign minister earlier this year, was a call to Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, even before he traveled to Ukraine to meet with Zelensky and Ukrainian officials. So Israel now is saying, we've done all that, and this is the thanks we get, Russia? This is the thanks we get? You get in bed with the Iranian regime, our greatest enemy, devoted to our destruction? You form a close military alliance with them? And Israel says, you know what? Two can play that game. Okay, you want to align yourself, Vladimir Putin, with our greatest enemy. Enemies, plural, really. All right, well, maybe we'll get a little bit closer to your greatest enemy right now, Ukraine. And that's what I think you see playing out right now. And I think Netanyahu, who is now prime minister once again, is someone who knows very well how this game, I hate to use the term game. It's not the right word, but I'm just drawing a blank right now. He knows how it's played. And he's a statesman. And he's been on the world stage for years and years. And key point here, he has dealt directly with Vladimir Putin. And Putin is the kind of guy, like many in the Middle East, who respect strength. So Bibi is saying, look, we're not going to lay down for you, Russia. And you want to play this game? You want to get in bed with Iran? Okay, then maybe we'll give Ukraine a little bit more support. What would that support entail? I don't think Iron Dome is going to Ukraine anytime soon. That would be a major, major escalation in the eyes of Russia. But I think you'll see Israel maybe be a little bit more friendlier, just to send a message to Russia, first and foremost. And also, frankly, because the West is hounding Israel to take a side in the conflict. But that's some of the backdrop, I think, the geopolitical backdrop going on here. And can you blame Israel when you think about that? You might not agree with it, but I can certainly see the rationale. Put yourself in Israel's shoes, folks. Russia is supposed to be, okay, not your friend, but there's diplomatic relations there. There's a relationship. And you've tried to, be a good player, a good actor in that relationship. And the thanks you get is Russia latching on to a nation that wants to destroy you. So if you're Israel, yeah, you're a little bit ticked off about that, I would think. And you're probably not so happy with Russia. And at the end of the day, you believe Russia should have never invaded Ukraine in the first place. And what Putin's doing is illegal and evil. So with all those factors, yeah, you can kind of see where Israel's coming from. What do you think? I know we have varying opinions on this. And we could talk Russia, Ukraine, and all day long. We'll get commenters saying the Nazis in Ukraine had it coming. Hey, look, folks, by the way, I'm not naive. I know about the history in Ukraine of pro-Nazi sympathies during World War II and pogroms. I'm not naive. And there's anti-Semitism there today, and the Azov brigades, I know about it. And that's the what about, and I get it, and Ukraine, not saints, for sure. Corruption, I get it, 100%. But what annoys me is when I'm talking about Putin and what he's up to, that people want to dance past that and redirect. They don't want to address what I'm saying about Putin aligning himself with China, Iran, North Korea, the fact he invaded in the first place and his territorial aims, all that. His foreign ministry's increased hostility towards Israel with statement after statement bashing Israel. That's what I don't like, when people want to dance past that and not address it and say, yeah, but what about this? What about that? What about Zelensky? Separate conversation. Let's address the issue at hand here and now. What are your thoughts on Putin and his alliances with enemies of Christianity, open enemies of Christianity, notorious persecutors? Do you really think that Vladimir Putin, in his meetings with Xi Jinping, in calls with Kim Jong-un, in meetings with Iran's mullahs, is bringing up Christian persecution and human rights and things like this, women's rights, and saying, hey, Ayatollah, maybe you shouldn't be arresting and hanging people for following Jesus? I don't think he's bringing that up. I don't think he cares. Sorry, folks, hate to break it to you. I don't think he really cares. And that's a sad fact. So, some of my thoughts on that. We'll go to Q and A in a minute. By the way, we've got, speaking of the Palestinians, all I can say is a terror wave that's been going on. First of all, let me just catch up with you guys before we get into that. Sorry for the shaky laptop. We have got a good amount of people watching right now, a few thousand, which is always good. Just looking at the chat here, a very active and lively chat as always. But thank you, everyone. Welcome. If you're just joining us, you missed the first 42 minutes of the live stream, but it's okay. You can catch the entire thing on the homepage under Newscast. The entire live stream will be there. Questions in a second. Reminder to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe. Click notification bell, all that good stuff. And the Instagram page as well. We got some cool stuff on there over the past few weeks, exclusive stuff, content, I should say, not stuff, but content, as we would say in TV land, from the Watchman production, which I think you'll like, on site at Crusader castles. Yes, there are the remains of several medieval Crusader castles in Israel, in the Holy Land. Fascinating stuff. So on Instagram, we had a lot of behind the scenes commentary there exclusively on Instagram. So check that out. Erick.Stakelbeck. I know it's a mouthful. ERICK.STAKELBECK. And yes, it's ERICK. Threw you off there. It's not ERIC, it's ERICK, Erick Stakelbeck. So check that out. Some good stuff there. Palestinians, real quick. Terror wave. Where have I heard that before? We've used that term a lot here in the newscast, but a pair of Israeli brothers murdered in cold blood, I believe it was on Sunday. And then a U.S. citizen murdered on Monday who was traveling near Jericho. Born and raised in Connecticut, he was in Israel for a wedding, and he was gunned down in cold blood as he drove along in his car. And again, two Israeli brothers gunned down in their car on Sunday in cold blood. I believe they were 21 and 19. All this unfolding in the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria. Now, the world calls it the West Bank. Here in the Watchman, we call it Judea and Samaria because that's what the Bible calls it, and that counts for a whole lot. That's everything to me. But again, the world usually calls that area the West Bank. And between the West Bank and Jerusalem, we certainly have an uptick in terror. We've had at least 13 Israelis murdered in terror attacks since the beginning of this year in only 2 months, including some bloody, vicious attacks in Jerusalem, which we documented here in the newscast. Folks, I'm not going to say too much about it because we have to get into questions, but do me a favor. Prayer warriors, keep it in prayer. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem as well. We're mandated to do that in the book of Psalms. So keep it in prayer. I know it sounds trite. Oh, yeah, pray. No, prayer works. I've seen it in my life. God moves, and man, when he moves, I'll tell you, you look back and say, man, I prayed about that, and I prayed about that. And it might not have happened right away, but folks, let me tell you from my own life, and you've probably experienced this as well. When God is ready to move, fasten your seatbelt because he moves, and he moves fast. You could be waiting for 2-3 years, and man, when, Lord? How long, Lord? Then it happens, and man, it happens, and you say, whoa, he was ready on God's timing. His timing is always perfect, not only in the world and world events, which he controls. He sits on the throne, but in your life, I never, and I pray this every day, God, I never want to be outside of your will for my life or outside of your timetable. Don't get ahead of a piece of advice in your life. Don't get ahead of God. His timing is perfect. Wait on the Lord. It's terrible. I know it's easier said than done. Nothing worse than waiting. You want it now. But God will withhold something from you because maybe in 6 months, it's going to be a better situation. Just a short example. Wait on the Lord. Don't get ahead of God and try to do it your way and force things, because then it can get really bumpy. So that's just life in general. His timing is perfect, and his timing for the nations is perfect, and elections, all this stuff. So continue to pray, because where else will you go? Peter said to Jesus, Lord, where else would I go? You have the answers to eternal life. I think that all the time. If you're ever tempted to stray from your walk with Jesus, where else are you going to go? He's the way, the truth, and the life. Where else will you find your answers? What does the world have to offer you? By accepting Jesus and choosing to follow him, the great king, didn't you already reject the world? One of the reasons you came to Jesus is because main reason, the world has nothing for you. He's the way, the truth, and the life. Why go back to that? Yeah, you might be frustrated, even depressed or down, but don't lose sight. Continue to hang on to the hem of his robe and follow him in the dark places. Trust me, folks, you will not regret it. By the way, movie recommendation along those lines. Has anyone seen Jesus Revolution yet? Great movie. I took my daughter to see it on Sunday, and starting on questions in 30 seconds. So send the questions along. Great flick. Jesus Revolution. I highly, highly recommend it if you have not seen it. Hey, it finished number 3 at the box office over the weekend. Awesome to see a Christian movie do that. And I wouldn't say a Christian movie, folks. Sometimes Christian cinema may not be the highest quality. I hate to say, production values, acting, all the rest. This movie is just top notch. Kelsey Grammer, who you've seen, Frasier, of course, played on Cheers in his own show, Frasier. Joel Courtney, some other well-known actors in this movie. It is excellent. It's well done. It's inspiring, encouraging. Take your family and see Jesus Revolution. I took mine and we had a blast. It was inspiring and encouraging. We need a revival like that again, folks. And we see the stirrings now on college campuses here in the United States. Things are dark in this country right now, where I'm sitting right now. But with Jesus, there's always hope. There's always hope. You can't stop the gospel. So keep praying. It looks improbable. It looks like things are done. I know it's all over. Yet there's the light. And the light in the darkness is Jesus. Jesus Revolution. Good stuff. Okay, let's get to the Q and A. Let me pull up the questions. Pardon me 1 second. What do we have? I'm sure we have some great questions. Okay. Here's one from Sherry from Texas. And we addressed this on yesterday's newscast. What's up with Brazil letting Iranian ships dock? I'm glad you brought this up, Sherry. We talked about this on yesterday's newscast. If you missed it, you can check it out here in our archives under newscast. Again, that was yesterday. We reported that Brazil, the leftist government, Lula da Silva, the new Brazilian president, he was formerly Brazil's president, did prison time, got out of prison, and then won a highly disputed election recently. Now he's president once again, and he allowed 2 Iranian warships to dock in the port of Rio de Janeiro over the objections of the Biden administration. It was pretty interesting how he did it back in late January, because we initially reported this on the newscast in January. Iran wanted to dock in Rio de Janeiro, and Lula denied their request under pressure from the Biden administration because Lula was traveling to Washington, D.C. to meet with Joe Biden. All of a sudden, he's back in Brazil, and he says to Iran, okay, the D.C. junket's over. I met with Biden. Come on and dock. So that is only a temporary refusal by Lula. They are docked there through March 4th. I believe they may make a pit stop in Venezuela, Iran's close ally. Similar, we see the Russia-Iran alliance we're talking about today. That Iran-Venezuela alliance, cozy, getting stronger militarily. I posed the question yesterday, could we see Iranian drones in the Western Hemisphere in the clutches of Venezuela? I don't think that's beyond the realm of possibility. Iranian missiles, is that crazy to suggest? As Iranian cargo planes travel to Caracas? I don't think so. I think of the Monroe Doctrine. I think of the Cuban Missile Crisis, things you might have learned about when you were a kid here in the United States growing up. Iran and America's adversaries would love to have that kind of foothold here in the Western Hemisphere once again. So great question there. And what is up with it? Why? Why would Brazil do that? Sherry, it's real simple. We have a wave throughout Latin America of left-wing Marxist governments that are hostile to the United States to their core. Their ideology is anti-American and anti-Israel, which naturally makes them friendly to the adversaries of America and Israel, like Iran. We have Lula in Brazil now. Of course, we have Nicaragua. We have Cuba, of course, Venezuela, of course. Also, Colombia and Chile, which were right-leaning governments, have now gone left in recent years. So there's kind of a left-wing wave sweeping across Latin America, and that doesn't bode well for the United States to have that at your doorstep. But that is the deal with that, with Lula allowing Iranian ships to dock. Keeping an eye on it closely, and I wanted to mention this on yesterday's newscast as I pull up some more questions here, but the tri-border region, where Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina meet, it's a lawless area there. That has long been a hotbed for Hezbollah. Hezbollah is involved in the drug trade there. They take that drug money and they send it back to Lebanon to fund terror operations. So this is not an overnight thing with Iran digging its claws into Latin America. You'll probably see a pit stop in Venezuela, and then the goal of the regime is to transit the Panama Canal. Is that going to happen in the next few weeks? We shall see, and we shall report on it for you here in the newscast. Okay. Let's see here. Basil Corey. Hi, Eric. Do you think the Palestinians helping Russia against Ukraine, because of that, Russia must help them against Israel? Scratch my back and I'll scratch yours type scenario. I don't know that it would get to that point. If there's 300 Palestinians and a few hundred Palestinian recruits, that's not enough for Russia to go all in and help Palestinians against Israel. But I think the Iran relationship, but I think it's telling. I don't think it can be discounted that Russia is aligning itself again with an enemy of Israel. The Fatah movement, these guys are mostly these Palestinian recruits, mostly from Fatah, which is not friendly to Israel. And I think that's telling. I'm not saying Russia is going to help the Palestinians in any tangible way other than diplomatically. Certainly, again and again, Russia stands up at the UN against Israel and is pro-Palestinian. But I think the Iran question is a much greater one, where Iran is giving Russia really weighty, significant military assistance that demands a quid pro quo from Russia. That's something to watch closely, and we are watching. Okay. Question from Jesse from Maryland. Any update on the red heifers? No. I was asking some folks about that when I was in Israel last week. Not really. Where we left it back in September, October, we were covering it here in the newscast. I believe it was 5 heifers, unblemished. They arrived in Israel from Texas, and I haven't heard anything since, really. But I'm glad you asked that, because that demands a follow-up, and I'll dig into that a little bit. And hopefully in the live stream next week, I'll have an update for you. I assume they're still unblemished, these red heifers. I think they had to reach the age of 2 before they could be used. You're jogging my memory there. Good question, Jesse. I'll look into that, because many, obviously, for prophetic reasons, are interested, and for good reason, in the heifer situation. Okay, let's see here. Just looking up some questions. We've got some good ones, folks. Bear with me here. Question, from B-Dog, what's up with the Russian plane landing in Cuba, not at the main airport? B-Dog, I have not heard this. but that would not surprise me. Russia has had a close relationship with Cuba for decades, obviously, but I'll look into that. That goes along with what we're talking about, Latin America. Certainly Cuba, there's America's doorstep. You could say, okay, South America, maybe not exactly the doorstep, but awful close in our hemisphere. Cuba's at the doorstep, 90 miles off the coast of Florida. So that is certainly an escalation. Let's see what we have here. Let's see. We've got a bunch of questions here. I'm kind of scrolling through, folks. Running Man 87. Good flick, by the way. Arnold Running Man, the Running Man. If Putin is Russian Orthodox, does he have any scholars explaining to him what role Russia is to play in the end times? Can he see it? Great question, Running Man. Number one, if he is Russian Orthodox. Look, Putin, for him, he's a Christian in name only. I mean, this is a guy who he identifies as Russian Orthodox, but he's not following Jesus. He's not following the Bible. He's not following the tenets of Christianity, clearly. So that's one thing. The other thing, in terms of scholars explaining to him what role Russia is to play in the end times, yes, I'm sure they are, but he's surrounded by sycophants who are telling him what he wants to hear, who are actually telling him that he's going to save the world in the end times. He's got some apocalyptic types who are painting this as a great struggle, a struggle for God, a holy war for God, and Russia's on the right side. I personally, and look, I don't know if Putin's going to be the man in charge during that Ezekiel invasion, the war of Gog and Magog, but I personally look at Russia's role in the end times, and I see the war of Gog and Magog and how that ends up for a coalition of nations that I believe will be led by Russia that comes against Israel. It doesn't end well, to say the least. If you doubt that, just check out the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39. So I think Putin has a vastly different view of the end times and his role in them. He thinks he's playing a positive role in them. And I'm sure he's got, again, sycophants around him, yes men, including in the clergy there in Russia, who are telling him what he wants to hear, who are declaring this a holy war, and that it's a righteous war and a righteous cause. So that's what we are dealing with there. Okay, let's see. Hello from North Carolina, Shepherd Preparedness. What are your thoughts on Iran being so close to a nuclear bomb? My thought is it ain't good. That's an easy answer. They've been close to a nuclear bomb for years, but I think you're referencing the report from yesterday where the Biden administration is saying that Iran may very well be just 12 days away if it so chooses. Say Iran tomorrow says, okay, final push, we're going to develop the bomb. If they do that, it would take about 12 days for them to have a nuclear weapon, according to the Biden administration. They're enriching 90, not to get too in the weeds with the science of it, but you need to enrich uranium at 90% for it to be weapons grade. Iran right now is enriching it at over an 80% clip. They're right there, folks. If they choose to cross that nuclear threshold, they can, and they can do it in about 12 days. Again, according to the U.S., Israel will have something to say about that, needless to say. And that's not going to happen without an Israeli first strike against Iran's nuclear facilities, especially with Bibi back in office. Fasten your seatbelts. Keep it all in prayer. This was good today with the live stream. Great having you with us. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.